Ready to roll.
With the Mack Pinnacle, and we're gonna start. We're gonna spend the rest of the afternoon with this truck, starting with Longview, Texas, and it's gonna be some race paper. Since last Friday, I did row on the International Pay Star, but it was only 99 gallons, and so I went ahead and swapped it up this morning, and other than that, let's spend the rest of this day with this ride, and let's get going. But I gotta turn the radio on before I take the waste paper over to Texas. So, all right. So let's turn that on and get going, everyone.
The years go by as quickly as you wait. Enjoy yourself, it's later than you think. Enjoy yourself, it's later than you think. Enjoy yourself while you're still in the pit. The years go by as quickly as you wait. Enjoy yourself, it's later than you think. My name's Terry and I think you're all truly wonderful. It's good to be wise when you're young. You can only be young for once. Enjoy yourself, have some fun.
Still to come on D6, the extraordinary voice of Isaiah Bell.
What's required of you right now is no more and no less than exactly what you are.
I take myself over to the doctor's office. She sits me down and she says, look, get some exercise. Best treatment for anxiety, get some exercise. So go to a psychiatrist to see if I can get some medication.
Join us for the Moth Radio Hour. True stories told live from the Public Radio Exchange, PRX.org. The Moth Radio Hour, Saturdays at noon on News 88.7.
Make a difference this season. Join Houston Public Media as a new member today, and you can select a ticket to News and Brews at St. Arnold Brewing Company. Your donation of $144 will support trusted local news and give you a chance to connect hosts over brews, bites, and conversation. Join the community that makes this possible at houstonpublicmedia.org/donate or call 888-909-0887.
I'm Brent Bambury. You're listening to Day 6 on CBC Radio. We stream live on the CBC News app. Just go to the local tab, press play, and it will work wherever you are. You can also find and follow us wherever you get your podcasts.
There's nothing a penny will buy anymore. Not a gumball or a small piece of candy. We don't even use the old-fashioned fuse, where the penny at least came in handy.
12 years ago, this week, on February 4th, 2013, the Royal Canadian Mint stopped distributing pennies. And in the House of Commons, MP Pat Martin of Winnipeg waxed poetic.
Nope, the penny's a nuisance. It costs too much to make. They clutter our change purse and they don't circulate.
Did we notice? Did we care? Did we die trying to remember if 3 cents rounded up to 5 cents or down to 0?
No, the penny is useless, but there's one thing I'd say. I hope they never start treating old MPs this way.
At the time, it cost 1.6 cents to produce a Canadian penny, and most were just sitting in junk drawers going to copycats out of the garage. So Canada retired the penny, saved $28 million over the first 6 years, and $11 million every year since then. We got on with our lives. And we aren't the only ones. New Zealand, Australia, the Netherlands, Finland, Ireland, and Sweden, they've all gotten rid of their pennies. But the UK still has theirs, and so does the United States. In 2024, 3.23 billion American pennies were minted, and each penny cost 3.69 cents to produce. That same year, the New York Times reported there were 724 pennies per person in the U.S. just lying around. Last week on X, Trump's new Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, seemed to be hinting that they would put an end to the American penny. And I mean, if you're trying to cut $2 trillion of government spending, every penny counts, right? But this isn't a new idea. For more than 50 years, American politicians have appealed to Congress to end the penny.
The House will come to order.
In the 1970s, Treasury Secretary William E. Simon, in letters to Congress,
I ask that serious consideration be given to abandoning pennies and no later than 1980.
In the 1990s, the 35th director of the U.S. Mint, Philip Deal.
It's hard to think of a product of any kind in America that is as ubiquitous as the penny and as disposable as the penny.
In the mid-2000s, the Mint's 38th director, Edmund Roy.
One of the questions most asked when people find out that a good director is, when are we going to get rid of the penny?
And on and on. So, to the penny counters at DOGE, how about this? Ditch the penny,
she's going to sort of fly free and try to be more herself and be welcomed into another religion and another homeworld.
But there's also a struggle there, is there not, between her masculine inclinations and her feminine. So is there not also a kind of male-female conflict within that character?
Yes, there is. However, I think it plays out mostly as an internal-external conflict. The sense that I get from her is that she is very centered in herself, but it's the constant demands from outside for her to be different, for her to be more feminine and to produce an heir and to get married. That's where the tension really lies. I don't sense in her a great inner conflict of a more sort of non-binary. I think she's very comfortable in who she is.
This is an original one. This is when you premiere the Community Level Company. When you first heard about it, what attracted you to it?
Well, to be perfectly honest, I loved my character that they wrote for me. I mean, as a tenor, you often are, for lack of a better word, stuck playing these sort of moody young lovers. That's, especially in 19th century opera, that's what you get, which is one color, but life is full of so many more colors, and this character, well, I describe him as a Machiavellian femme, which is quite a vibe, and I love being able to dig into someone who's not particularly sympathetic, who's full of himself, but who's also very showy, and who's funny, but also quite evil, and that gives me a chance to really bite into the work, and I love that.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about your upbringing and how you came to music, because you grew up in an isolated fundamentalist commune, and you explored this in your solo show, My Book of Shames. But there's a great quote from you about it, how good and how modern gay. Thanks very much. But there's this other me that's at odds with all that. How were you at odds when you first set out to write My Book of Shames?
Well, the genesis of that show actually was that I performed a standalone piece that later became a kind of anchor of that show, which was about a non-specific, very vague, but unpleasant and painful relation that I'd had with a sort of ostensibly straight guy. And I almost didn't perform the piece in the situation that I was supposed to perform it in originally, because I felt that no one would relate to it, or that it would be sort of, I call it millennial whinging, just this sort of like, oh, I have no problems, so like avocado toast is too expensive or whatever. But afterwards, after I was encouraged by the Sean Guest, who I'm directing the show, to present it anyway, even despite my reservations, the response that I got was so overwhelming. I decided I had to explore the gap between how I thought people would respond to my story and to me bearing my soul, and how they actually did. And that gap is what the Book of My Shames is, how I see myself and how I keep being reflected back by other people.
There's a point in the show where the book is revealed to be a childhood journal.
Yes, that's how it's introduced, yes.
And you ripped all the passages from the Bible that mention homosexuality, and you pasted them into that journal.
Yes.
So what does it look like?
I mean, it's when you see it, I call it a Horcrux in the show. There's a sense that it is a physically very tortured-looking object. It's a large, sort of converted social studies textbook, but it's covered with string and tape and pins and paint, and you can tell that it's someone who doesn't have a lot of skill yet in making art, but who has a lot of intention and a lot of suffering, and it has to go somewhere physical so that there's some physical representation of this thing that is churning in my belly.
What was it like to perform something that is that deeply personal when your own story is also part of the vulnerability?
What's amazing about it, and this didn't become apparent to me until we'd already done a few runs of the show, but I've never felt more comfortable on stage than when I realized, actually in the middle of a dress rehearsal in one of the last runs we did of it, I was like, oh, what's required of you right now is no more and no less than exactly what you are. Because so much of classical art is honoring a tradition and creating something that's been created by some genius that you have there recording, and will you ever be able to do it exactly as well as that person did, who lived in a totally different time and had totally different priorities and different teachers, and but with the Book of My Shames, when I realized finally that programming of I'm trying to come up to snuff was not only not applicable but actually harmful, that what was required of me to put the final piece into place and to bring the show to life is to be myself fully, then I felt my whole body, all my muscles relaxed, and I was able to just how I respond to theater at all now. But at the time, it was a dissociation. It was a sense of being not myself and having an opportunity to go away from myself and to be in someone else's body for a moment.
But it must have been disassociated for you simply to be in the situation you're in your life. I mean, you've been trained within this commune to act a certain way, to reject the outside world, and then suddenly there you are being invited into it or trying to put yourself into it. What was that like?
Yes, with theater, it was more like predominant dissociation. It was like, let's do something with this dissociation that I'm in all the time. And as I said, now that's not how I relate to it at all. Now I have to be fully present in order to do the work that I want to do in a way that I struggle to be in my daily life, but that I have to also learn to be in my daily life. Now it's all about presence, but that's not how I relate to it.
Does it help to be more fully present when the work that you do is unabashedly queer, like the role of Hadrian's lover Antonius, which you helped to create for Rufus Wainwright's opera Hadrian? Is it important to you, or does it work better for you as an artist that you're in work that is identifiably queer?
On a larger scale, the queer element is a balm to the soul, certainly. But as I said earlier, so much of it for me is, am I, in all my facets, welcome in the room? Is it me, or is it, because you can always tell when they want somebody else, And when I flower is when it's very clear that it's supposed to be me with all the various facets of my being. And that includes queerness, of course, but it also includes sort of neurodivergence, and it includes my fragility, and it includes my intensity, and it includes my weirdness, So queerness is one element of that sort of 20-sided thing. That's me.
You're neurodiverse.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like a lot of people these days, I think it's not a diagnosis thing so much as a resonance with the community. And one of these things that many adults that I talk to, especially in performing arts, talk about is when you finally have a name for the thing that you thought was just you. It's something that when you realize a different way that you can care for the animal that is your body, because this other person has observed this about being like this, and this other person has observed this, and then I've observed this, and I sort of triangulate and figure out this is how I can take care of myself and live more effectively in the world. That's for me. It's not so much about do I have a particular diagnosis or do I take this medication or yeah.
You talked earlier about the traditional rules for tenors in opera and the kind of baggage that's attached to them. But you seem to be drawn to work that's new, it's bold, innovative. Where does that commitment to innovation, to boundary stretching come from?
Well, I think part of it is, honestly, the neurodiversity piece is a part of it, and I mean, the lines of this are all blurred, but coming from, I really came from an entirely different culture, even though we just lived an hour outside town. It was a totally different place. We lived totally differently. And so when you come into a world that's totally new and you have to figure out what's different and what, if anything, is a constant from where you came from, then you start to see where the boundaries are that people who have never had friction with those boundaries don't even perceive. And so for me, it's having this sort of ADD mind that doesn't have many boundaries already, which is both the great blessing and the great torment of that life. And also coming from a totally different culture and then transplanting a tender age into this new culture, that almost has nothing to do with me. That's just the environment that produced me in a way,
Okay, and Gaston just opened, and it's on Canadian Opera Company's main stage. What's your hope that audiences will take away from it?
With opera in general, but especially with this piece, because there's so much life force in it. It's filled with so much human intention and with so much creativity. And I know that because we've done 2 runs of it now, and with some of the same cast and some different, some of the same team and some different. My hope is always that people will be able to perceive it in the way that they perceive anything that they enjoy, not with their, I always call it the fancy brain. Now I'm going to the museum, now I'm going to see some Rembrandt, so I will put on my fancy brain. I really think that I appreciate the TV that I watch and that sort of street art that I like, the same brain that I appreciate this opera or Rembrandt. And I hope that all the work that we've done to make it have more bridges between the past and now will reach out a hand to people to enjoy it with their whole bodies and with their whole minds, not just I'm putting on my bow tie and I'm going to the opera.
Isaiah Bell, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, it's my pleasure.
Isaiah Bell is a tenor composer and all-around musical theater polymath.
this week. Day 6 was produced by Lori Allen, Michelle Parisi, Pedro Sanchez, and Samuel Johannes. Our senior producer is Gord Westmacott, and I'm Brent Bennett. It's 3 days till Benjamin Netanyahu visits the White House, 1 day to the Grammys, and 7 days till we meet again on day 6.
In every 4 people on this planet, that means festivity, family, and feasting.
Last year, right before then, my father had passed away, and so I didn't want my mom to be lonely on death, so I drove down to Southern California from my home, which is about an 8-hour drive, and I said, Mom, man, let's make a joke. And she was like, I don't know, I'm kind of out of practice, I don't know, I don't feel so good. And then all of a sudden she calls me a week before and she says, I told your sister to get me all the ingredients and the leads. And I was like, all right, she still got her game on.
That's renowned Vietnamese cookbook author Andrea Wynn. I'm also talking to Korean chef Winnie Kim and superstar Chinese cooking bloggers, the Lone Sisters from the Walls of Life. It's all coming out on the Splendid Table.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Laura Rahm. Starting Tuesday, the U.S. will impose a 10% tariff on Chinese imports. President Trump also signed orders yesterday to place a 25% tariff on most imports from Mexico and Canada. But NPR's Scott Horsley reports Trump ordered just a 10% tariff on Canadian oil.
One of the things we buy a lot of from Canada is crude oil, and Trump does not want to get blamed for a spike at the gas pump. So while he's ordering a 25% tariff on other imports from Canada and Mexico, he's calling for a smaller 10% tariff on Canadian crude. Of course, you could apply the same logic to everything else we import from these countries. You know, why have a higher tax on fruits and vegetables, for example, or TV sets or auto parts?
NPR's Scott Horsley. All 3 countries say they will respond. Texas is bracing for the impact of President Trump's tariffs. As Texas Public Radio's Jerry Clayton reports, Mexico is the top trading partner of Texas.
Trade logistics expert Gary Schwabel is executive vice president at IBC Bank, which is based in Laredo, the nation's busiest trade port. Schwabel has been in trade logistics for 4 decades and says it would likely take time before tariffs have a major impact on the Texas economy.
When we look at the economic impact measured by supply chain networks of goods, is when we're going to be able to feel it right there. We will see it, and we see a reduction in the drug activity.
Schwabel says he's hopeful the tariffs would not be imposed for a long period of time. I'm Jerry Clayton in San Antonio.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio is visiting Panama to meet the president and visit the canal, which President Trump wants back. NPR's Michelle Kellerman reports the Panamanian president has ruled out any discussion about that.
Secretary Rubio says he chose the Western Hemisphere as his first trip to show that, in his words, American leadership is back in this region, which he says was neglected in the past. He's visiting Panama, El Salvador, Costa Rica, Guatemala, and the Dominican Republic. Trade and migration are top issues, But this trip comes as the Trump administration halts most foreign assistance, including in this region. The State Department says Rubio has issued some limited waivers and exemptions to some aid programs in countries that he's visiting this week, but the spokesperson did not cite any specific examples. Michelle Kellerman, NPR News, Panama City.
The interim president of Syria is in Saudi Arabia. Ahmed al-Sharaa is seeking financial assistance to rebuild his country after more than a decade of war. His rebel group had toppled the longtime leader Bashar al-Assad in December. Sharaa is seeking help from both Arab and Western countries. Many of them did not deal with Syria when Assad was in power. You're listening to NPR News in Washington. Russia and Ukraine are blaming each other for a deadly attack in Russia's Kursk region last night, an area under Ukrainian control since August. A bomb struck a boarding school, killing 4 people. The school is being used as a shelter for people preparing for evacuation. Last night, the 68th Annual Obie Awards, which honor achievement off-Broadway, were announced. This year, as Jeff Linden reports, instead of holding a public ceremony, the American Theater Wing, which sponsors the awards, are giving the winners cash grants instead.
The Obies are different from most theater awards in that they never announce nominations in any category, just winners. And this year, the winners will be taking home money thanks to $250,000 from an anonymous donor. Among the 35 honorees are Jeremy Tiang, who wrote Salesman, which was named Outstanding New Play, and directors Zallian Livingston and Bill Routh for Cats, the Jellicle Ball, which reset the Andrew Lloyd Webber musical into the world of drag. Another winner was Cole Escola for Oh Mary, which moved to Broadway, where it's become a hit. For NPR News, I'm Jeff London in New York.
The music industry honors its own tonight at the Grammy Awards in Los Angeles. Beyoncé has 11 nominations for her latest album, Cowboy Carter, in several categories, including pop and country. She's won 32 Grammys and has 99 nominations, more than any other artist. But she's never won Album of the Year or Record of the Year. I'm Laura Ron, NPR News in Washington.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the Walton Family Foundation, working to create access to opportunity for people and communities by tackling tough social and environmental problems. More information is at waltonfamilyfoundation.org.
Hey, it's Francis. This week, we are celebrating the Lunar New Year, and for 1 in every 4 people on this planet, that means festivity, family, and feasting. Check out this episode we did last year to celebrate the day. I'm Francis Land, and this is the Splendid Table from APM.
Francis. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for coming. And, you know, it's time to celebrate. And famously, the Chinese New Year table is full of foods that have symbolic meaning, right? Like, every dish either looks like or, you know, the name of which sounds like some kind of blessing you want in the new year. And famously, dumplings look like old silver ingots, so they symbolize money, all that kind of stuff. What does your New Year menu look like?
So I'll start. This is Sarah. Yes, every item on the Chinese New Year table, particularly for Chinese New Year Eve dinner, so Nian Ye Fan, which is the evening before New Year's Day, every dish has to have some kind of symbolic meaning. At our Chinese New Year dinner, I think that a few things show up every year. So we always have spring rolls, which are kind of in the same vein as the dumplings. They resemble like golden bars. And then also like silver. Yeah, gold is better. Silver. And then there's always a whole poached chicken, which represents like wholeness or family unity. We always have 2 fish. So you eat 1 fish at the dinner and then you leave 1 for the next day as leftovers, and that kind of represents surplus for the new year.
Okay.
And then, you know, sometimes we'll see things like stir-fried lettuce, for example, which sounds like kind of like, it doesn't sound all that exciting, but in Chinese, lettuce is called shengcai, which kind of is like a homonym for like to make money, basically. So a lot of the symbolism in these dishes has to do with, you know, not just the visual appearance of the food, but in a lot of cases, like the name of the dish that's like a homonym for something having to do with prosperity or wealth or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one quick note on the Cantonese poached chicken is, you know, just all like kind of building on the symbolic aspect of everything. Like, it's truly a whole chicken. That's a head-on with feet chicken, because sort of if you cut away any part of it, you're kind of cutting into that unity and togetherness and that sense of wholeness. So, yeah, just there's strong commitment to those symbolic meanings.
I mean, this is really special because you describe a full menu, and when I think about the Chinese New Year celebrations my family had, like, I don't really remember all of those individual dishes. Like, I remember more this, like, theory, this concept of, oh, the dishes are supposed to sound like this, or they're supposed to look like that. And let's face it, as you mentioned, most of the time they have to do with money. Like, we want dumplings for more silver, we want rolls for more gold, we want lettuce for more cash. It's like, okay, what's like the crypto dish? I guess we don't have those anymore. But for me, the one I really remember and I've always loved is shrimp. I don't know if this is universal in you know, all the different regions of China, at least in Guangzhou, or speak Cantonese, where my family's from. The word for shrimp is ha, and so if you have ha 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 on a dish, that means you'll laugh all through the year, and that I always find that really lovely. But does your table change year to year, Caitlin?
Honestly, I feel like these days we really, as a family, I think, enjoy the different traditional aspects of it. So there are some dishes that are just so comforting that we always want to have those around. So like the whole poached chicken with ginger and scallion oil is just like, that's just like a non-negotiable. Like, we have to have that. Same goes for fish. It's usually a Cantonese steamed fish. And then I feel like the rest of it honestly kind of okay, so maybe I go back a little bit on what I said. The rest is a little bit open for interpretation, because I feel like as me and Sarah have deepened our knowledge on Chinese cooking, these days we have much more of like an opinion and a say on what we want to cook and what we want to eat for the big celebration. So it's kind of like, honestly, a little bit like Thanksgiving in the way that you kind of like think about the menu, and you know, each family member has the things that are their favorites, so you try to work all of those in. Yeah, I don't know. I need to pause because I'm losing my train of thought, but this is where the editor would cut. But Sarah, yeah, maybe
I can keep going. Yeah. So I think that what's great about having worked on the blog for the last 10 years is that I think my sister and I have become a lot more invested in the Chinese New Year meal. Because, when we were kids, it was kind of, we felt like we were maybe a little bit detached from it. Like, it was a meal that our parents prepared. And, my sister and I didn't necessarily have, like, the knowledge or the know-how to, like, contribute as much. We made dumplings with our grandmother and like, we were part of it that way. But we definitely didn't have the knowledge of, like, what should be on the table and what do these dishes actually mean symbolically. And now that we've been working on the blog for almost 10 years now, and we've even developed some of these recipes ourselves. So at this point, I feel like it's almost like we're just like a lot more invested in the menu. So like my sister brought up Thanksgiving, right? Like Thanksgiving used to be like our only domain to like contribute to put dishes on a holiday table, so to speak, right? Because like at Chinese holidays, like my sister and I were basically useless growing up. So I think like now I feel really proud that, if we have to make a Cantonese poached chicken, like it's not just my parents like making that anymore. Like I could make the poached chicken, or like I could make my mom's spring rolls, and also like what's been great about the blog is that it's pushed us to look for dishes from other regions that aren't necessarily like our family's background, to see like, okay, what are other families in other parts of China cooking for the New Year? Because Chinese New Year dishes, while they all sort of have that like commonality of being symbolic, they can vary quite a bit from region to region. So it's been fun to kind of explore different dishes and learn more about them over the years. Because every year, right, every Chinese New Year, we have to come up with like a new handful of Chinese New Year recipes. And after 10 years, you're like, okay, we've kind of gone through all the ones we make. So now it's time to look at, what other families are doing and experiment with those recipes.
Great. And what are some of those regional dishes that you didn't know, from your own experience that you learned through looking into it, through research?
So one of them, it's this dish, like we didn't really grow up eating this, but it is a very famous dish, lion's head meatballs. And it is actually sort of from like the region where my mom grew up, but like for whatever reason in our family, we didn't really ever make them. But it is a large braised meatball. And I guess like the name comes from the resemblance to a lion's head. But that, my mom did a lot of research on that recipe, and it was fun to develop that one. She also did this recipe for another one that we just like never had growing up, which is a stuffed gluten. I know like now today gluten is like the enemy, but in China, right? Like you'll see like essentially like seitan or gluten in various forms, like a tofu. Yeah. And there are these fried gluten balls, for lack of a better term, but they're like fried like puffs almost. They're very like chewy and when they're cooked they're chewy, but when they're fried they're like kind of light as air, and you can stuff them. So my mom stuffs them with like this meat filling and then braises them. And that was like I did not know that was a thing. That was like a totally new thing for me to see. My mom also made these little dumplings that look like money bags, which I don't know if that's like a traditional regional thing, but it's definitely like just like an interesting idea that she got from basically like surfing the Chinese internet for ideas. It's just really kind of fun to just like look back at what's going on in China around the holiday, like what people are making, and to share that with an American audience.
Yeah, I love that. I love the idea of like generations from now, your descendants, what was the meaning of this dish? Why do we celebrate with this? Like, well, your great grandmother was surfing the internet one day. We'll be back with more with Caitlin and Sarah Leung, authors of The Walks of Life. And then we're on to Tet, the Vietnamese New Year with Andrea Nguyen. I'm Francis Lamb, and this is The Splendid Table from APM.
Hi, I'm Brent Bambury, host of Day 6, a news magazine that serves up a surprising take on the week. On Day 6, you'll get a different perspective on the biggest stories going and find out about stuff that you might have missed. We do news, politics, tech, arts, and pop culture. Day 6 will give you something to think about, talk about, maybe even laugh about. Day 6, your news cocktail with a twist.
Day 6, Sundays at 11 a.m. on News 88.7.
This winter season, warm yourself up with an evening of cheer and beer this February at News and Brews. I'm Craig Cohen. Join me and your other favorite Houston public media hosts for an evening of brews, food, and great conversation at St. Arnold Brewing Company. When you donate $144, you can select your ticket, and if you give today, we'll throw in a free pint glass. Visit HoustonPublicMedia.org/donate or call 888-909-0887.
Table is supported by BetterHelp, committed to helping clients with issues ranging from relationship challenges and goal setting to grief and depression. Learn more at betterhelp.com/public. I'm Francis Lamb, and this is the show for curious cooks and eaters. We're celebrating the New Year today with Chef Lee Kim, author Andrea Wynn. Right now, continuing our conversation with Sarah and Caitlin Lowe, authors of The Walks of Life. Back to you. So Sarah, before the break, you mentioned the stuff gluten, and that is not the most appealing word, especially because of how we associate gluten now. Mainly you hear it because of people have gluten intolerance, but that is a traditional food where it was a great way of getting protein, a plant-based protein. If you didn't have meat available, you take flour, make a dough, keep washing the dough until all the flour and starch comes out, and you just have this gluten, which is this beautiful, stretchy, sort of proteiny meat replacement. But I love the idea of trying and puffing it up. That sounds amazing.
Yeah, there's a really rich tradition, and obviously Hannah Che, Vegan Chinese Kitchen, she gets into this extensively, but there's a really rich tradition of Buddhist-style vegetarian or vegan cooking in China, and with the gluten, when you wash the flour and make this gluten, you're also getting another byproduct, which is the starch, the wheat starch from the flour. And with that, you can make noodles, or you can just isolate the wheat starch and use it to make dumpling wrappers and things like that. So it's just, when you explore these recipes, there's so much to learn about the culture behind it, and where these dishes came from and where they originated.
Yeah. Katie, you mentioned that when you were younger, and I had a similar experience too, you would just kind of show up, right? When everything was on the table, and you weren't really that, we were kids, and you were really trying to learn, why are we eating this tonight? Why is this the thing that we're seeing here? And but you said as you've gotten older, you've gotten not just learned more about it, as you talked about working on the blog, so it's it's your work, but you also felt like you're more invested in these traditions. Talk about that. Why do you feel that way?
Yeah, when I think about, it's funny, reflecting on Chinese New Year now as adults. I think about the way that it used to be when we were kids, and we were very much passive participants. It was very much off to grandma's house in Flushing we go, and we would sort of show up, and there'd be all these dishes laid out on the table, and my grandmother would prepare all the symbolic things, and a lot of that kind of just pick up by osmosis. You weren't really actively knowing exactly what should be on the table, or you were just kind of reacting to it. So I actually have a funny memory of sitting down to the table and suspiciously surveying all of the things as a little kid, and my mom would say all of these dishes have symbolic meanings, and if you eat them, then it'll help you have a better New Year. And I would go around and be what does that mean? And what does that mean? And she'd say whatever, and I'd be oh, well, I don't really like that food, so maybe I'll just do without that this year.
Silver.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, a lot of that stuff, even though I joke about even though when I was like a little kid, sometimes I really like wasn't all that clued into like exactly what was going on. It was like all about like the raining down of the red envelopes with money. You know, I really just had this appreciation that I didn't even realize even that I had for these traditions and these dishes too.
Yeah, I think you're kind of spoke on this, like, oh, when you were younger, when we were younger, like, it was sort of passive, right? It's like, okay, the day's here, and like, okay, I'm supposed to do this, I'm supposed to make sure I say hi to that auntie, you know, whatever.
Put on a red sweater.
Yeah. I'm just focused on like,
go
how
straight
much
on.
pocket money I get from the benefits of like, you know, the gross family, and not really thinking about the actual traditions and how, I don't know, maybe it's nostalgia, but maybe it's also like, oh, that's something I'm starting to think about. Like, this is who am I, right? This is kind of who I am.
Totally. And I feel like something that me and Sarah have been like funnily thinking about more and more as we get older is like more of the superstitions around Chinese New Year, and you know, yes, like you wear red on the day, and in the week leading up to it, like you're supposed to clean the house before Chinese New Year so you don't like accidentally sweep away your luck, and you get a haircut, you buy a new outfit, and all these things that like when you're a kid you're kind of like, is that really like, is there really anything to that? But you know, the uncertainty of adulthood kind of like takes hold, and then suddenly you're like, maybe I should go get a haircut, like every year.
I can get.
Exactly. Like every year I'm like, am I gonna really do a deep clean of my apartment? I don't know. And like I hem and I haw, and then like 3 days before I'm like, I have to do it, and then I like do like a top to bottom clean of the apartment, and then I feel like my luck has been secured. It's like just.
Well, this was a blast. Thank you guys so much for coming through. Happy New Year to you.
Yeah, Happy New Year, Francis.
Happy New Year. Gong hei fat choi.
Lacing double loy.
Still said with the slight sheepishness of kids, I feel like. You make the rounds, and it's like, gong hei fat choi, then it's like, can I have my money now?
Sarah and Caitlin Young are the co-authors, along with their parents, Bill and Judy, of the blog and cookbook, The Walks of Life. You can find their recipe for poached white cut chicken at splendidtable.org. Okay, so if you start in the very middle of China and head due south, you come to Vietnam, home to one of the world's absolutely greatest cuisines. It's really one of my favorites. It's so full of fresh flavors and incredible savoriness. And yet, it also has a surprisingly simple, comforting, Lebanese culinary tradition, according to our friend Andrea Wynn. Andrea is an award-winning cookbook author and one of the OG food bloggers at Viet World Kitchen. She's here now. Hey, Andrea, it's great to see you.
Hey, Francis. Always good to talk to you.
Yeah, this is going to be a pleasure. And hey, I think we start with this. The name of the Vietnamese New Year celebration, Tet.
Yes.
Can you tell me what that means?
You know, like it means so many things to Vietnamese people, and when we celebrate Tet, we say Ăn Tết, which is Ăn means to eat. So we literally eat the new year up. Like we just absorb it, and food, you know, plays a huge role. So we absorb it through our souls, our minds, you know, through taking a look at the longevity of our family histories, and then we also celebrate Tet at the table and in the kitchen. And the first day of Tet is called Tet Nguyên Đán, and it is like the most important day of the year.
Is there a meaning? Was there a translation or transliteration?
No, not that I know of. We've never talked about, like, you know, there's so much influence from Chinese culture in Vietnam, and I've like tried to trace, you know, just tried to figure out, like, is there a meaning to the word dead? And I've yet to come across it, and if you do, let me know. I mean, you know, we travel in sort of similar circles, but not.
Well, I'm asking because it's, you know, when I was growing up, it was always just translated as, oh, Chinese New Year. And well, I think more properly now we're saying Lunar New Year because it's not just the Chinese who celebrate it, really. Multiple Asian, Southeast Asian cultures celebrate the Lunar New But I've never known like a name for the holiday, the festival, the celebration. In Cantonese, which is what I speak, like we've always just called it Sunbin, which literally just means New Year. So I was intrigued to know that there was a specific name for the holiday in Vietnamese, that it wasn't just New Year.
Yeah, no, I mean, before my family came to America, we just knew it as Tết, and then we come here and everyone's like, Chinese New Year, and I was like, I'm not Chinese, and so I would always try to correct people, Lunar New Year, and it's only been in the last couple of years, right, that people have like switched from Chinese New Year to Lunar New Year, so that people are really seeing this as a celebration that's rooted in the lunar calendar versus the solar calendar, and that is celebrated by people who are of East Asian descent.
Yeah, totally. And obviously, China and Vietnam are neighbors, and there are commonalities across the cultures. Like you and I were talking about this yesterday, how the tradition, which for me was the most important part when I was a kid, of getting lucky money in red envelopes is something that is common both in Vietnam and China. You wear new clothes, clean the house, all that stuff. But the food traditions are quite different, right?
Right, they are. And when I've taken a look at Cantonese menus, they're always like full of, these really charming and playful homonyms. They're, things that are supposed to bring you luck, or the gold bars that are shaped like fried egg rolls or spring rolls. In Vietnamese tradition, we focus on very simple things. Rice, meat, beans, and vegetables. And I know that sounds so boring, but when there is several things. Okay, thank you. That's why you and I are friends. And so, there is this Vietnamese thin sticky rice cake that is called bánh chưng when it's wrapped by northern Vietnamese folks. And it is a square-shaped tamale, so to speak, that looks like a cake, and it's about 1 or 2 inches high, and it can be as small as 3 inches or as big as 10 inches, and it's full of sticky rice, and that's been wrapped up in banana leaf, or in Vietnam you would use a particular leaf that either way the leaf would stain the exterior of the cake a pale jade green, which I think symbolizes sort of like the renewal aspect of the year, because it's considered like a springtime renewal thing, even though we're still in winter. But anyway, inside there are mung beans that are kind of buttery, and then fatty pork and lean pork. It's all seasoned by pepper and fish sauce, and that's it. It's really good. It comes together, and it's either wrapped as a square or it's wrapped as a cylinder called bánh tét. Not bánh tét, but it's bánh tét, spelled T-E-T, but people are always confused. Anyway, you start prepping for it a few days before the actual first day of the year. And the first day of the year, you open up these cakes, and they're warm, they're soft, and they're fragrant. And they just say to me, Vietnam, because it's a very humble kind of tradition, and it's absolutely delicious.
Go straight on.
That's interesting, actually, because I think of, my impression of Vietnamese food is that it is, there's a huge emphasis on contrast and freshness, right? A lot of fresh herbs, crunchy raw vegetables to go with your noodles, or to go with something stewed or something grilled. So it's interesting that the celebratory food is a cake that's steamed, so it's kind of all melded together rather than sort of contrasting. Do you know if there's what do you think about that?
Yeah, most definitely. So this package of sticky rice and beans and pork, it's boiled for hours in a giant pot, and it's a communal thing. You literally have to boil it for, if you've got medium-sized one, it's about 5 inches square, it boils for 5 to 6 hours. And yeah, so it's this long-term investment of time and a lot of communal cooking. But the crunchy contrast comes in the forms of pickled vegetables and preserved vegetables. This time of the year, if you are in northern Vietnam, you really don't get a lot of the fresh herbs. There are some, but it's not that kind of plethora of hedgerow greenery that people expect from Vietnam.
a family recipe for your bunchum? Like, is it like it's got to taste like mom's or doesn't count?
Turn left.
You know, mom's tastes like something she brought over from in 1975, and her recipe goes back to a friend of the family's who actually wrote an article in Saigon about how to make bánh And when he came to America, he was like, I'm going to bring some of my most valuable things. I'm going to bring like a photocopy or a mimeograph or whatever it was of that particular article. And he sent it to her, and that's how she was able to replicate the intricacies of wrapping the cake, because it's not really made of like many ingredients, but in order to take those ingredients and assemble it into basically like a gift box of food that's wrapped in banana leaf is pretty difficult. And so she does that. She taught me how to do it.
How do you do that? How do you make like, soft food appear in like
exactly.
right angles?
Right. So there is a mold, a wooden mold, in a square-shaped frame, and then I line it with leaves, banana leaves and bamboo leaves in a particular pattern, and then I put my ingredients in, and I fold the leaves down, but then there's a certain point where I have to remove it from the mold, and that's the tricky part. And I literally will somehow slide that mold onto my forearm, and then do like a little Cirque du Soleil trick to remove the mold and then wrap it all up. But aluminum foil helps.
The ingenuity of humankind is using tools. So there you go.
Exactly, and we didn't have aluminum foil in Vietnam in the 1970s, and so people would just kind of freestyle it with a particular kind of leaf. They wouldn't use banana leaf, and but everyone would just say, well, how beautiful can your bánh be? But in America, you can make it beautiful with like the wooden mold as help, as well as the foil.
Who's in charge of making in your family?
Typically, well, I split duties with my mom, but she, it depends on her mood. And last year, right before that, my father had passed away, and so I didn't want my mom to be lonely on Tet, so I drove down to Southern California from my home, which is about an 8-hour drive, and I said, Mom, man, let's make bánh. And she was like, I don't know, I'm kind of out of practice, I don't know, I don't feel so good. And then all of a sudden she calls me a week before and she says, I told your sister to get me all the ingredients and the leaves. And I was like, all right, she still got her game on. And so I go down there and she was just like, we're going to make it. And 2 days before, she goes into high gear to like soak the rice, to cook her mung beans, to prep the leaves. And then the day before, she and I wrap them together. And she doesn't just wrap like 2 or 3. She made about 20. And she had 3 pots going. And she like climbs, she's 88. She climbs up into her garage and like pulls down these gigantic stock pots that she and my dad used to use to make bánh. And I'm just like, you're gonna fall, woman. She's like, no, I'm not. And I'm like trying to help her. And it was, and it was a great, wonderful distraction and a wonderful way for us to celebrate the new year, something new without my father. And I think that's the other aspect of Tet, is that it's very family oriented, and there's a lot of nostalgia, and there's a lot of this notion of gratitude. And that's what I always want to tell people about Tet, is that it's for us, for Vietnamese people, it's a very humble kind of time of the year.
We'll be back with more with Andrea Nguyen, author of Vietnamese Food Any Day.
Right.
I'm Francis Lamb, and this is The Splendid Table from APM.
It's a new year, the perfect time for fresh starts and commitments. Join Houston Public Media today. Your first gift powers trusted news and programs we all rely on. Give now at HoustonPublicMedia.org or call 888-909-0887.
From the Center for Investigative Reporting and PRX, I'm Allison with Reveal.
The story is going to be about people trying to keep secrets.
True stories that affect your world every week on Reveal.
Was there any reason why you didn't want to tell us the truth?
We didn't lie, we just withheld information.
Because there's always more to the story on Reveal.
Reveal, Saturdays at 2 p.m. on News 88.7.
If you took part in our recent fundraiser, take an extra step to have your donation matched. Current and retired employees may be eligible for an employee matching program. Visit houstonpublicmedia.org/match to search for your company.
The Splendid Table is supported by the American Egg Board. Culinary exploration, versatility, and convenience is unleashed whenever someone breaks an egg. Inspiration starts by cracking into the possibilities, because eggs are meant to be broken. And by The One Recipe, an APM Studios podcast from producers of The Splendid Table. Host Jesse Sparks talks to chefs and gifted cooks about the stories behind some of their favorite recipes. Find The One Recipe in your favorite podcast app, and this season, you can also find step-by-step videos of each recipe on Instagram or The Splendid Table's YouTube page.
Go straight on.
I'm Francis Lamb, and this is the show for curious cooks and eaters. We're talking today about Lunar New Year menus from China, Korea, and now Vietnam, with cookbook author Andrea Wynn. Let's get back to the third. So we've talked a lot about the banjong, the sort of the centerpiece of the meal, and how eating is such an important part of celebrating death. Do you feel like also, do you evolve the menu? Do you feel like you don't dare evolve the menu? Do you add things along with the banjong? Like, what do you...
Right, and isn't there always that fear, Francis? It's like when you stray from tradition, that something or someone's going to strike you down.
Sure. like lightning bolts.
Right. And for me, as a writer, people always coming to me and ask, what do you traditionally do? And I'm just like, well, these are the traditions of my family, and these are Vietnamese foodways, but foodways evolve. And so one of the things that really kind of gets me about Tet and my family's celebration is that it's very, very meaty. And it's the time of the year when you're supposed to traditionally kill a pig and make, different kinds of charcuterie and also simmer parts in caramel sauce. And so we always make these pork riblets in caramel sauce and fish sauce. It's like a bittersweet, savory kind of dish. But this year, I'm going to do a vegetarian take on a southern Vietnamese caw. And so the southerners will cook pork belly up with coconut water, caramel sauce, and eggs. And they serve that with their Tet celebration. And because my family's like half northern and half southern, I'm like, I better go all regions, okay? Just gotta go all the way from the top to the bottom of the country. But the version I'm making is going to involve frying tofu and then simmering it with coconut, milk, and fish sauce, and having the eggs in there with the caramel sauce. And it's absolutely delicious. And the tofu gets like this richness that is very similar to the pork belly, except you don't have to eat pork yet again. Because I love pork, but it gets to be very, very heavy duty.
Yeah. Well, I love that you also feel the, obviously you have a pull of tradition, pull of, wrapping and doing this craft with your mother. Right. But also that you feel the freedom to say, hey, I'm going to switch things up for my own taste too.
Making that switch as a cook is something that when I was younger, I wouldn't have done because I felt like I didn't have the right to. But as I become, a more well-practiced cook, a person who feels, more confident in the kitchen and in my culture and in terms of who I am, I take more liberties with it. And without straying too far from what makes Vietnamese food what Vietnamese food is. And the recipe that I talked to you with the pork and eggs in caramel sauce is something that I came up with for my upcoming cookbook, Evergreen Vietnamese. And that's all rooted in Vietnamese traditions of using a lot of ingredients from the earth with just a little bit from the sea and some meat. And I remember sharing this idea with my mom. I was like, that pork belly, caw recipe, well, I'm gonna make it with tofu. And at first, because she's such a traditionalist, she was like, what are you doing? That sounds so wrong. And I was like, lady, it's all right. And I served it to her, and she was like, oh, this is really good. So even for someone of her generation, born in the 1930s, she's willing to be flexible. yourself up to new ideas, but in a way also tracing those back to really where your food traditions come from. And I think that is a time when I'm always thinking about that, going back and then moving forward.
I love that. That's super, super lovely. Well, thank you so much, Andrea. It's been such a pleasure talking with you.
Always a pleasure talking with you, Francis.
Andrea Nguyen's latest book is called Vietnamese Food Any Day, and her next one, all about the great plant-based dishes of Vietnam, is Evergreen Vietnamese. And on our website, splendidtable.org, you can find one of her classic recipes, pork ribs and caramel sauce. It is a really, really great time for Korean food lovers in New York City right now. There has just been this incredible bumper crop of exciting, creative Korean restaurants all over the city. One of New York's absolute greatest Korean chefs isn't really looking to innovate anything. Only Kim keeps it old school. So old school, in fact, that he has been spending the last 12 years traveling back and forth to Korea, learning how to make the traditional seasonings like soy sauce, fermented soybean paste, that are the backbone of Korean cuisine. And so we figured if you're that interested in tradition, you'll probably take what you read pretty seriously. Hey, Chef, it's great to see you.
Hi, Francis. Nice to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm super excited to talk with you about this. Because I just don't know much about what a traditional Korean Lunar New Year celebration is like. And when we talked earlier, you said you do actually celebrate it in a very traditional way.
Yes.
Do you remember how you first started learning about these traditions?
I was born in Korea, and I was there until I was 4. I lived in England and then went here to the U.S. My first memory of celebrating these Lunar New Year customs is when I was about 5 or 6. It's the first time that I sort of realized I didn't have a father, because my father passed away when I was 2. And New Year's, a lot of my relatives would get together at my house and sort of have this. For me, it was festive. You know, the ladies, the women cooked all day in the kitchen from scratch, and at night we had this huge table with enormous amount of food, fruits, candies even, and we would all sort of take turns bowing, and then afterwards we would just eat, pig out all night, and everybody would go home with food that was left over. And I found out later the reason why we were there was to sort of remember my father who passed away. And this act or this ceremony is called Jesa. And we do it twice a year. Once Lunar New Year and once the day that he actually did pass away, which is early December. And you know, I never really grew up in Korea, but the more I visited Korea, I realized it's not just me, it's a lot of people, Christians, Buddhists, and all religions. It's more of a tradition, cultural rather than sort of religion, Buddhist based.
But some of the particulars of how you celebrate are rooted in religious.
Yes. And when I was living in England or in New York, my mother was too busy to cook and we didn't have relatives in the country, so we would actually celebrate or do the Jesa at a Buddhist temple. And you know, we are Christian, go to church every Sunday, but twice a year we went to the Buddhist temple to remember my mother. What I remember, you know, when I got to be a certain age, I started to question the monks who would perform this Jesa with me. Like, why are we doing this? I'm Christian, you know, what's this for? And I think I was 12, and that explanation that I heard when I was 12 is the reason why I keep doing it, and the reason why I will do it for the rest of my life. The monks explained that when we die and we become spirits, we're just like we're alive. We're very social. So all the spirits are hanging out together. There's a group of friends, and they like to have parties, and their parties are thrown by us who are still living. So these Jesas are for them a bragging right. You know, it is their party night because they go around to all of their friends' chesas, and they eat, and they have a good time because everybody's remembering them, bowing to them, pouring them liquor at chesa. And, you know, if you don't have chesa for your ancestors, then they are embarrassed, you know, because people, you know, it sort of shows that you haven't lived a good life where people on earth don't hurt you. Yeah. So, you know, I had never known my father, but he gifted me my life, and I'm a very happy person. So, to show that appreciation, I would always try, or I have done a chesa for 48 years, 47 years, yeah.
Wow. And so what's on the menu for this feast?
It's gotten now where every family or every region has like sort of different rules. What I do is we're a little bit away from the Buddhist diet. So when I was doing this at the temple with the monks, they would never use any spices. They wouldn't use garlic, onion, the aromatics, because they said that these strong, pungent aromas would scare the spirits away. Well, you know, I learned from my relatives that my father loved spices and loved meat and loved fish. So I just thought, why not cook food that he would like? You know, even if it would scare some of the spirits away, which, you know, I don't believe too much. But I
truly a chef.
And I told my son the other day, he's only 13, and he's like at that point where he's questioning why we do this. I told him, look, you don't have to cook, but go to a steakhouse, leave an empty table for me, and order me a nice porterhouse meal. And that would be, because that's how I would like to order. Traditionally, we always have chunks, which are sort of savory pancakes, little fillets of fish, zucchini, tofu, and then we definitely have namus, which are vegetables. Like if you know bibimbap, it's the vegetables inside. So spinach, watercress.
Which now you mentioned, they're not very heavily seasoned.
They're not very heavily seasoned, but they always have garlic. All the Korean namus have garlic and bean sprouts, mung bean sprouts, and I sort of make it delicious because we have to eat it afterwards. So I season it to the point where, you know, it's yummy. And those are the traditional ones.
Are they like blanched?
Yes, they're blanched and then they're dressed with salt, soy sauce, garlic, sesame oil, sesame seeds, etc. Sometimes you add gochugaru, which is the red pepper flakes, which I do because it tastes better. So, and then a lot of seasonal fruits. These days it would be persimmons, very colorful fruits as well, oranges, and then candy. Candy, I actually can't get here, but traditionally in Korea, they have candies that are specifically made for chesa. Very colorful, Buddhist colors, a lot of like pine, green, blues, reds. It just makes the table look a lot more festive. And then always a soup. Always a clear soup and a large bowl of rice and alcohol. Sometimes I do soju, sometimes I do makgeolli.
So soju is like a clear spirit, right? Almost like a
yes.
But makgeolli is like a cloudy fermented rice.
Yeah, it's brewed like a beer almost, and I guess you can sort of say it's almost like a nigori sake / beer. Alcohol content's only 6%. It's on the sweeter side because it is a lot of sugars for the rice. And it's traditionally a farmer's drink. Farmers, middle of the day when it was too hot, they would drink makgeolli, take a little hour nap, and then they would go back to work. It's actually not filtered. It's actually the scraps from the actually filtered part from the more expensive Korean spirits and alcohol. So from the rich people who drink the rice wine would be clear, and then the scraps left over would go to the farmers. These days, though, it's really hip in Korea. All the young people are sort of into it, and you know, I like it. So I don't know if my dad liked it, but I'm sure
restaurants, like some of the seafood pancake, kimchi pancake.
Okay, so that is a chun as well, but that's more like a composed chun, where it's large and round. The chesa chun's a little bit different. You make a chun individually, so it's flour, egg batter, and then pan fry. And we do that with like little slices, like coins of zucchini. We do it with little fillets of fish. So we fillet fish and cut it down to like sort of bite-size knobs, and then we season it, flour it, egg batter it, and fry it. So it's a lot of work. It really is like individual fridges. Yes, yeah. And you know, chesa food. When I experienced this, I don't know if it's the best tasting Korean food, but it is the most labor intensive. It is the most sort of the toughest to research because traditionally, because you can't season it too much, the ingredient itself has to be fresh. It has to be really good because that is what you're showcasing. So a lot of this takes in Korean word jeongseon, which is care and dedication and devotion, all of that.
I guess putting it all together, I'm thinking, if I was in Korea, and I know there's probably regional variation, but like, what are some of the ingredients that I would be looking for right now that are standout ingredients in the winter?
Cabbage, not the cabbage, because this is kimchi making season. Kimchi season. Okay. Right now is when cabbage is the sweetest. Sweet potatoes. And definitely fish. Like right now it's at its fattiest. And the namuls, it will be dried. Spring, summer, great vegetables. Koreans dry it and then they hydrate it and leave it out in the winter. And that tradition still exists. So you will be going to the market knowing during the summer which stalls have the freshest and the nicest vegetables. In the winter, they'll be selling the same vegetables that are now dry. So that's what you would get. And if for those who may not know what namu is, if you go to like a Korean barbecue restaurant or a Korean restaurant, they start you out with these little side dishes, these banchans. And most times they will have several namus as one of the banchans because they are cheaper to make, and you can sort of make a whole bunch at the same time, and it stays, you know, sort of fresh in your fridge for a couple of days. And you know, in Korea and here, it's for every Korean family. We always have namu in the fridge, and it's also a staple for chesa.
Yeah. I know you just opened a banchan like deli. So I can't wait to come visit you there. I can grab a bunch of these namus and bring them home.
Yeah.
Nice.
I make those out.
Well, Chef, it has been great talking with you. Thanks so much. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy Chesa.
Thank you.
William Kim's restaurants in New York City are Donji, The Little Banchan Shop, and Meiju. His cookbook is called My Korea. You can find his recipe from Simple John, those fritters he was talking about, at splendidtable.org. That is our show today. To all of you who celebrate, Happy New Year. Talk to you next week. Splendid Table is produced by APM, American Public Media, and supported by Made in Cookware. Made in Cookware is crafted by chefs for chefs and designed for restaurants and home kitchens around the world. The cookware can be found at madeincookware.com. Our show is made every week. Technical producer Jennifer Luking, producer Erica Romero, managing producer Sally Swift. James Napoli is our digital producer. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Francis Lamb. This is APM, American Public Media.
The rain finally came to Los Angeles. For now, the fires are out and everyone can turn their attention to rebuilding. We're going to ask how exactly the city should go about that on the next Today Explained.
Tomorrow evening at 7:30 here on News 88.7. It's going to be sunny this afternoon with a high near 76 degrees. The south wind around 10 miles per hour. Tonight, patchy fog after 10 p.m. Otherwise, partly cloudy with low around 58 degrees and a south wind 5 to 10 miles miles per hour. Tomorrow, Monday, areas of fog before 11 a.m., otherwise mostly cloudy, with a high near 80 degrees and south wind 5 to 10 miles per hour. This is your NPR station, KUHF Houston News 88.7, a service of the University of Houston.
I'm Christopher Kimball, and this is Milk Street Radio. Today, Tamar Haspel of the Washington Post is here to share 10 controversial truths about food. You'll probably hate what she has to say about diet soda.
We have reams of research on this stuff, and all indications are that they're safe.
You might turn off your radio when she talks about farm fresh eggs.
Everybody who's ever done a blind taste test on eggs has concluded the same thing, which is that they all really just taste like eggs.
On today's show, nothing is sacred, not even organic farming.
I am a fan of organic. I have met organic farmers doing wonderful work, but it works when it's a niche.
Tamar Haspel on the most contentious truths about food. That's coming up next on Mill Street Radio from PRX after the news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Nora Rahm. President Trump's decision to impose tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China is getting an immediate reaction. Canada and Mexico are planning retaliatory tariffs, and China says it will file a lawsuit with the World Trade Organization. Beijing is urging the Trump administration to, quote, rectify its erroneous approach. The Trump administration says it wants Beijing to do more to cut the supply of the synthetic opioid fentanyl. NPR's John Ruish reports.
China's foreign ministry says it's strongly dissatisfied with the new tariffs and resolutely opposes them. It says Beijing will take necessary countermeasures to, quote, firmly safeguard China's legitimate rights and interests. It stopped short of saying what those measures will be. Experts say many of the precursor chemicals for fentanyl flow from China to Mexico, where they're combined in underground labs to make the drug. Beijing says it's taken steps to stop trade in those chemicals as part of what it calls extensive anti-drug cooperation with the United States. The foreign ministry says the new unilateral tariffs violate World Trade Organization rules, and they will inevitably undermine future cooperation against drugs. John Ruich, NPR News, Beijing.
Lawrence Summers has served as both Treasury Secretary and Director of the National Economic Council. He told CNN the tariffs will mean consumers will pay more in the U.S.
Everybody who uses an input from Canada or Mexico in their production is going to have a cost shock, and they're going to pass it on to consumers. When consumers are paying those higher prices for the imported goods, they're going to have less money to spend on other things, and that's going to tend to push the economy downwards as well.
Summers says the tariffs are a gift to Chinese President Xi Jinping by giving him an excuse for China's economic problems. The last soldier to be identified among the 3 killed when their helicopter collided with a passenger jet above Washington, D.C., is being remembered as a leader who loved flying. Jay Price of member station WUNC reports.
Captain Rebecca Lobach transferred into the ROTC program at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill as a junior, but quickly made up ground to earn a coveted selection into Army aviation. Jasmine Johnson, herself now an Apache attack helicopter pilot with the North Carolina National Guard, was a friend and study partner in the ROTC.
She loved a challenge, like most aviators do. She wanted to be a part of that culture, to be in combat arms, and to, serve her country, be in the fight, and also be a good leader.
In a written statement, her parents said Lobach had hoped to become a doctor after her service in the Army ended. For NPR News, I'm Jay Price in Durham.
All 64 people in the passenger jet also died in the collision Wednesday night. This is NPR News. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is in Panama, where he's to visit the Panama Canal. President Trump wants the U.S. to regain control of the canal, but the Panamanian president has said the canal belongs to Panama. Rubio travels next to El Salvador, Costa Rica, Guatemala, and the Dominican Republic. The Grammy Awards will be announced in Los Angeles tonight. In a crowded list of nominees this year, NPR's Sydney Madden explains why all eyes are on this year's most nominated artist, Beyoncé.
Her latest album, Cowboy Carter, is recognized in 11 Grammy categories this year. Its nominations span pop, Americana, country and melodic rap categories. With 32 career wins, Beyoncé holds the current record for most Grammys won by any artist. But there are still 2 major Grammy categories that she's never won: Album of the Year and Record of the Year. A fact that B herself addressed on Cowboy Carter.
It was just going in.
Cowboy Carter is up for Album of the Year, with its lead single, Texas Hold'em, vying for Record of the Year. Sydney Madden, NPR News.
The Super Bowl is 1 week from today in New Orleans. Security is being heightened after New Year's Day when a man drove a truck through crowds on Bourbon Street, killing 14 people. Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry says if visitors are asked at security checkpoints to have their bags searched, they're free to say no, but then they're not free to enter. I'm Nora Rahm, NPR News in Washington.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Lilly Endowment, a private foundation supporting NPR's coverage of religion and spirituality, and Jarl and Pamela Moe, focusing on civil liberties, foster youth, public radio, and the arts.
This is Mill Street Radio from PRX. I'm your host, Christopher Kimball. Have you ever eaten a farm fresh egg? And do you remember what it tasted like? Tamar Haspel says it was probably just like any other egg you've ever had before.
We had a bunch of people in, some of whom were food professionals, and we literally blindfolded them and we spoon-fed them soft-boiled eggs. And the net was nobody could tell them apart.
Today, Tamar Haspel of the Washington Post is here to stop the lies we tell ourselves about food. From the truth about diet soda to organic vegetables, nothing is sacred. But first, we're talking about fame. When you hear the term celebrity chef, you might think of Julia Child or perhaps Martha Stewart. But centuries before the art of French cooking, there was a chef in England named Robert May. And instead of earning a reputation for quiche Lorraine, May was known for filling his pies with live animals. For more on Robert May's circus-like approach to cooking, we're joined by historian Dr. Amanda Herbert. Amanda, welcome to Milk Street.
Thank you for having me, Chris. I'm delighted to be here.
So before we get to live frogs jumping out of pies, etc., we're talking about someone who's a chef to the very rich and famous. So let's talk about who was this guy, what was his background, where did he train, etc.
So Robert May was born in Buckinghamshire in 1588, and his father was a cook in a great house. And young Robert worked under his father as a child and had so much talent supposedly in the kitchen that the owners of the household sent him to France in order to learn about the best of cooking. And he became so well known and so famous that he spent most of his career sort of as a traveling celebrity chef. He worked in 13 kitchens across the UK, in Sussex and Essex and Kent, and made a name for himself as someone who practiced, I guess, what today we would call extreme dining.
Yeah, so let's just talk about this extreme dining. I mean, I remember reading about, chickens that were baked in a pie, but they were still alive, and then they would come alive when the pie was opened, and they would run down the table and off. Dining is the wrong word. I mean, one of the ones I loved the most was a dead stag, a deer, with arrows stuck in it, and you pulled out the arrow and wine would flow. I mean, absolutely. Could you explain that to me? I mean, that just seems, it's not that it's just gruesome. It's quite odd, isn't it?
It is. So what May said was that the chefs should construct a deer out of pastry. He uses the word paste, which for 17th century people can be anything from like a dough to a thick, almost like a piece of rock by the time you get to
I think even with Fanny Farmer in 1896, pastry was referred to as paste still. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So it would have been a really hardy material. It would have been very thick, very dried, very stiff. And the idea was to construct a deer out of paste so that it looked as if it had just died. And then this would be placed on the table with arrows, real arrows, sticking out of the side of the paste deer. And May says in his commentary that you should encourage the ladies to pluck an arrow, and that when they do, as you said, wine will gush out as blood from a wound, is what May says in the book where he describes it. And he says that this will delight and horrify the visitors and the eaters. And I imagine it did.
What are some other examples? Let's just talk about live dishes that included live animals in them. Tell me about the frogs and some of the other ones.
Yeah, you were never sure if your food was alive or if it was dead. I think that is correct. So one of the things that May says is that he loves to create these pies where he'll blind bake a pie crust top and bottom and then put live frogs or live birds into the finished blind baked pie crust. It will then be taken to the table with great ceremony, and just as the diners get ready to cut into the pie, the birds and the frogs will erupt out of the crust and scare them. And what's more is he says the frogs will then hop along the table, scattering the rest of the food. The birds will fly up towards the ceiling to try to escape, and the flapping of their wings will cause the candles on the table to go out, plunging the room into sudden darkness.
Now, some of the, just to give him credit, though, I looked at some of the other recipes, and some of them were very modern and, straight out of the 21st century. A salad of beets, baby spinach, sorrel, and dried currants with a dressing of oil and vinegar. A blackened broiled lobster dressed with butter, lemon, and nutmeg. So not all of it was, a dead paste deer. Some of this food was actually sounded pretty good, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I would eat any of those things. I would not eat the dead roast deer, the dead deer. But yeah, those foods sound like anything you'd get on a modern dining table, which is one of the things I love about studying 17th and 18th century recipes, is that you have these moments of feeling very familiar tastes, familiar combinations, and then you turn the page and you're faced with something you would never contemplate eating.
So what about, there were also architectural choices, some really amazing sort of set pieces, some of them with little cannons packed with real gunpowder. Could you talk about those?
Absolutely. So one of May's dining fantasies, as he calls them, is to create a battle on the dining table. He has his staff prepare, again out of paste or pastry or dough, a castle, and then also a ship. And then he fashions tiny cannon, packs them with real gunpowder, and outfits both the castle and the ship with these gunpowder-filled pastry cannons. And then on a signal, the kitchen staff will light the fuses, and the gunpowder will explode, the pastry will explode, and he says, in fact, it'll fill the room with the stink of the powder, the kind of sulfury gunpowder smell, and surprise everyone who's watching.
The other thing I loved about this, I didn't expect to read, is that Robert May and other people at the time were very smart about promoting their work.
Absolutely. So May is encouraged to write a book as he nears the end of his life. He had this fabulous career. He's a household name for a lot of very elite people in England in the 17th century. And the book is called The Accomplished Cook, and it comes out in 1660. So it comes out at the end of the English Civil War. And so it's just as the nation is kind of emerging from this enormous period of strife. And he writes the book, and he's encouraging people to kind of embrace fine dining once again. Now, most people, like Robert May, didn't typically write books, and they certainly never had their pictures in books.
Yeah, he's got an illustration right up front.
Yes, he's in fact the first food worker to have his image in a book in the English language tradition, which is pretty amazing.
There are cookbooks in the American canon, American Cookery from the 1790s, I think. Does this book sort of go out of fashion and disappear come the 18th century? Or is it, part of the canon of European cooking for a long time?
I think that The Accomplished Cook becomes part of the canon, but an unacknowledged part of the canon. You see bits and pieces of May's recipes showing up in many different cookery books for the next 100, 200 years. But the recipes aren't credited to May. Now, it's pretty typical of the period. People don't have the same sense of copyright that we do today, and so I don't know that people are necessarily making a lot of frog and bird pies. I actually sincerely hope they're not continuing to make live frog and bird pies. But there is a survival of some of May's works, and you do see that cropping up in recipe books on both sides of the Atlantic.
Do you get a sense, looking at the book, about his attitude towards what he was doing? For him, this is all about craft and culinary technique, and the bigger picture just never enters into the book in any way.
Yeah, I wonder about that a lot. What May's own thoughts and feelings might have been. He's a working guy, and he makes his living with his hands every day. And yeah, he has very fabulously wealthy clients, but that's not his life. And when he is staging these elaborate feasts to scare very elite people, to get their clothes dirty, to have them choke on the smoke and be terrified and delighted in equal measure, there's a little part of me as a scholar that wonders if he's laughing a little bit behind the scenes when he sees all of these very fabulous, fancy, rich people kind of get their due around the dinner table.
Amanda, it's a pleasure, from live frogs jumping out of pies to pies made of partridges. Thank you so much.
You are so welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
That was Dr. Amanda Herbert. She's an associate professor at Durham University, also author of the Gastro Obscura article, The Fantastical Feast of England's First Celebrity Chef. Now it's time to answer your baking questions with our special guest host, Cheryl Day. Cheryl is the author of Cheryl Day's Treasury of Southern Baking. So, Cheryl, you told me about your neighborhood when you first got started with the bakery, but could you describe it a little more? It just sounds like a really cool neighborhood.
It's always been cool, but to be fair and to be honest, when we first opened up there, 22 years ago, it needed some love. And so we came in and we made friends with all our neighbors and learned early on that when Griff got his haircut at the Boys to Men barbershop across the street, that if he took cinnamon buns and, maybe some chocolate chip cookies and other treats, there was there's this connection, I think, between food that it just instantly connected us as part of the community, which is exactly what I wanted. But yeah, it's a great neighborhood. Nowadays, it's come a long way. It's gotten a little bit more highbrow. The other day, I looked out the window and I just thought it was the funniest thing. I took a picture, Chris. There was a couple and she had on Chanel sneakers. And I was like, I never in a million years thought I'd be seeing that in front of back in the day, but here we are.
I love the Boys to Men barbershop. Is that
yeah? Boys to Men barbershop. Unfortunately, they are no longer open, but the sign's still there, and it's just really fond memories of how it all started, for us. And it's still just a great neighborhood to make connections with people, and I absolutely love it.
It's those old neighborhoods have those great store names.
Yeah.
All right. Let's take a moment. Welcome to Milk Street. Who's calling?
Hi there, this is Caroline.
Hi, Caroline. How can we help you?
Well, I like to bring little treats into the office, and it's not necessarily very convenient to bring in like an entire pie. I didn't know if y'all had any suggestions on how to miniaturize some of the classic, like a pecan pie. I'm especially kind of wondering what to do with the crust. If y'all just have any advice, I'll be happy to take it.
Well, the easiest thing to do is do bars, right? Because they're easy to make and easy to cut up, etc. But if you want to do a pie, just roll out the dough, get a biscuit cutter or something similar, cut out rounds and fit them into muffin tins, right? And then fill them, halfway and bake it off. Obviously, the time would be different, much faster. But that's what I would do. Just use a muffin tin. Cheryl?
That is a great idea, but I started my career baking for my office first. And so I know how much that's appreciated. Plus, it takes time. I have a shortcut pie crust that's very much like a shortbread crust. It's just literally flour, brown sugar, a little bit of salt, a little bit of melted butter, very much like making a cookie crust, but it's very flaky. And then rather than having to roll out all those little mini things, you basically just scoop a round of the dough and press it and make what we call, I'm sure you know, tassies. You're in the South. And
hold on, wait a minute. I'm from the North. Guys, translate this for me. What's a tassie?
Caroline, do you want to translate tassie?
The way I would describe a tassie is like a teeny weeny little pie.
Exactly, a little tartlet.
Okay.
I actually get the little mini muffin tins that you can buy. You can do like 24 at a time. And then you can press those down and you'll make like a little insert. Blind bake those off, and then you have little tartlets or tassies that you can fill with whatever you like. And they're adorable and delicious.
Well, I appreciate, honestly, both of those methods sound delicious. I might have to try both. Cheryl, would you spray any cooking spray on the muffin tin? Would you worry about sticking?
Yeah, you can definitely spray it first. I mean, it's a very buttery recipe, but that's not going to hurt, definitely. So, yeah, get a little cooking spray and spray the bottom and then start filling those little rounds up. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you for the advice. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
I gotta say, I mean, as a northerner, southern speak is so. I mean, it's a foreign language, but my favorite thing that people say. I don't know if you've ever said it to me, Shelby. You said, "Bless your heart." I just know that always makes me nervous when someone says that.
Yes.
Bless your heart.
I hope to bless my heart when I try the brulee pie. That's when we're in trouble.
Well, no,
I think it's going to be great.
Caroline, thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you, both.
This is Mill Street Radio. If you have a baking disaster, give us a ring. Our number is 855-426-9843. One more time, 855-426-9843. Or drop us an email at questions@milkstreetradio.com.
Welcome to Milk Street. Who's calling?
Hi, this is Chelsea from Hamilton, Ohio.
Hi, Chelsea. How can we help you today?
So I have a question. I've been trying to make my own kind of like bursty boba, but I've been having a hard time getting them after I place them into the cold oil to be steady enough to make it through the strainer to clean them off. And I've tried different things from like auger to gelatin to pectin. They all kind of don't work. I'm not really sure what's wrong.
You know, I've been doing this for a really long time. I've always found a way to make up an answer if I didn't know the answer. But you've really got me on this one because I can't even pretend. I've never made this.
I've never made bursting boba either. Cheers to you, Chelsea.
So, on the off chance we can be helpful, could you give us like step by step how do you make it?
Yeah, so essentially what you do is you pick your flavor of choice, like a Gatorade or something, heat it up into a pan, follow the directions for just like basic gelatin, and in the meantime, for like half an hour, you put a glass of vegetable oil in the freezer, and you let it chill. Then you take it out, and I usually put it in like an ice bath, they call. I have the plastic disposable hypodermic needle, and I put the straw of the Gatorade solution up into it with all the pectin and everything. And then I just kind of like slowly push the lever down to allow it to drop into the oil. So it forms a perfect little bubble, and then eventually it floats down to the bottom of the glass and it gets heavy enough. And it looks kind of like fish eggs at the bottom there. When I pour it out into like a strainer, they usually either break up. Now I found like the auger works the best, but usually it only lasts for like a little tiny bit. If I try to like kind of rinse the oil off, it kind of breaks them up even more.
You don't have trouble with the spheres forming when you drop them into the
right? No, the
It's just that they're not resilient. They're not tough enough when you strain them out.
Yeah.
My relatively uninformed reaction is you don't have enough thickening. So I would wonder whether you needed to use more gelatin, or do you also chill the liquid with the gelatin down a little bit before it's put in? Is it still pretty hot when it goes into the oil?
Well, you got to work quickly before it starts setting.
It takes a while to set, though, right? I mean, I've worked with gelatin before.
Yeah.
It'll take a while. I would just wonder whether if it needs to be a little cooler before it goes in the oil. But I think the big thing is insufficient amount of gelatin.
But I know, like, if I try to use a pectin or gelatin, sometimes if I put tiny drops in the bottom, like tiny glass, sometimes they're just so fragile, they'll just make a whole bubble. It does not solidify at all. The auger does the best.
There's one other thing. There's two kinds of pectin. There's low sugar pectin and regular pectin. And the low sugar pectin comes in a pink box. This may be a lower sugar situation than it's usually used to, so you might want to try that. That might thicken up better, but it just sounds like I would double. Either use low sugar pectin or double the gelatin amount.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't sound like it's having a trouble forming. It's just not keeping its shape.
Yeah. The other thing is that if it's too much of gelatin, it could just completely solidify into like a marble.
You know, that's exactly right. Like a lot of gelatin desserts will keep setting. Like if you put it in the refrigerator for 2 or 3 hours and then you want to serve it, if you let it sit in for 8 hours, it'll get a lot firmer.
Yeah.
So you're right. Gelatin's really tricky because it'll just keep sitting. So try the low sugar pectin and see if that works.
Okay.
There you go. That's a great stab at that.
See, I pulled something out. It may not work, but it sounded good. Anyway.
Yeah, sounds good.
Well, let us know because this is a new one on me.
Yeah, try it out.
All right. Take care.
Great, you too. Thank you.
Yeah. Bye. This is Mill Street Radio. Coming up, from diet soda to organic farming, Tamar Haspel reveals the most controversial truths about food. That's after the break.
This is News 88.7.
The people in Los Angeles who lost everything in those fires are trying to find a way to move forward.
People need to go in. They need the closure. They need to go in and say, okay, it is gone. There's nothing I've got here. I've got to get started.
I'm Kyle Roosdahl, that difficult first step. Next time on Marketplace.
Monday evening at 6:30 here on News 88.7.
Season, warm yourself up with an evening of cheer and beer this February at News and Brews. I'm Craig Cohen. Join me and your other favorite Houston public media hosts for an evening of brews, food, and great conversation at St. Arnold Brewing Company. When you donate $144, you can select your ticket, and if you give today, we'll throw in a free pint glass. Visit HoustonPublicMedia.org/donate or call 888-909-0887.
This is Mill Street Radio. I'm your host, Christopher Kimball. Diet soda is bad. Organic farming has all the answers. According to my next guest, we tell ourselves all kinds of lies about food. Tamar Haspel is here to discuss her Washington Post article, 10 Things I Know That Are True About Food That People Do Not Want to Believe. Tamar, welcome to Milk Street.
Thanks for having me. I'm a big Milk Street fan. I have several of the cookbooks on my shelf.
That's the first thing we ask as pre-interview is, do you subscribe to Milk Street? So, first of all, you're going to be one of the most unpopular people ever. After we go through the 10 things I know are true about food. Now, the first thing is gene editing can be used for good. And one of the examples caught my eye because when I was a kid, we had this beautiful chestnut tree outside of our house. And of course, it died and was cut down. And when I was growing up, you know, chestnut trees were dying right and left. So I guess gene editing might be able to bring them back.
It's possible. Scientists have been working on this for quite some time. And the reason all the chestnut trees died is because there was a blight. It's a kind of fungus. But these scientists figured out that they could take one gene from wheat, and that gene allowed the tree to metabolize oxalic acid. And it was oxalic acid from the fungus that killed the trees. And, you know, I believe they're still
also had an example closer to the food industry. You say chickens that produce only female eggs.
Right.
And you parenthetically remark, so 7 billion male chicks don't have to be put through a grinder.
7 billion.
Yeah, that is amazing.
Saving all of those lives. And not to mention, yes, of course, the chicks themselves, but think about the people whose job it is to throw chicks into a grinder. And think about the toll that must take on your humanity. And so much of improving our food system is also improving the lives of the people who work in it.
Okay, number 2, diet soda is fine. You say that some of these studies, like sucralose that's used in Splenda, you say that the sucralose dosage that was used in the tests was the equivalent of 50,000 cans of diet soda.
Yeah, that was one of the most recent studies that found, and I don't know if you remember the headlines, that sucralose is genotoxic. That was that study that used a really high dose. But you have to step back and say, okay, why would a scientist use that high of a dose that no one would ever in their wildest dreams ingest in their entire lives to see if something bad happens? And one possible explanation, and it's the one I'm sticking to, is that they're trying to establish that there's something wrong with this product. And the nutrition community has a long and storied history of hating artificial sweeteners. And I find that view to be really puritanical and holier than thou, given that we have reams of research on this stuff and all indications are that they're safe.
Okay, number 3. Subsidies didn't create our terrible diets. I thought this was really interesting. You say, but just go ahead and tell that story, because I didn't understand this.
So people believe that the fact that we eat a lot of crappy food is because the ingredients in crappy food are really cheap, which they are, and they're cheap because the government has subsidized them, which they have. And if we rejiggered our subsidy system, which I am wildly in favor of, we could have cheap broccoli and expensive corn and soy. And this is a fundamental misconception about the nature of growing vegetables versus the nature of growing row crops. So to grow an acre of broccoli, the expenses that go into that are, depending on, of course, where you are and how you do it, $5,000, $6,000 per acre. Whereas if you're growing corn and soy, the corn, for example, costs, $700, sometimes even less. One of my favorite metrics when we talk about this stuff is calories per acre. And corn is 15 million calories per acre, which is huge. Like spinach is 1.5 million, 2 million. So corn and soy have been developed and researched and planted not because of subsidies, but because they are the most efficient cereal grass in the case of corn and legume in the case of soy. You know what the peak year for corn acreage was in the United States?
No idea.
It was 1934. Growing corn predates subsidies, and all of the economists I've talked to say, the maximum price impact would be around 10%. I mean, there are all kinds of levers that move that affect the prices of commodities. It's hard to tease out subsidies, but the people who study this say it's a very small effect.
All eggs taste the same. Now, for 20 years, I had my own chickens, hens, and had my own eggs. And I have to say, the two things you notice was the yolks stand up.
Right.
And the yolks are deep orange, they're not pale and yellow. But what about taste, though? That's surprising.
This is what we set out to find out, because like you, I have kept chickens for probably 15 years now. I have 2 in my yard as we speak. And when we first got them, I was very excited to have eggs that came from chickens that had good lives, and I'd go out in my bathrobe and get breakfast. And by the way, I'm still excited about that. But after a while, it occurred to me that they just tasted like eggs. So there was nothing for it but to have a blind taste test, and literally blind, because as you noted, the color is different. So people can't be able to see that if you're trying to isolate taste. And so we had a bunch of people in, some of whom were food professionals, and we literally blindfolded them
and we spoon-fed them soft-boiled eggs, and at least 2 shirt fronts will never be the same. But the net was nobody could tell them apart. And everybody who's ever done a blind taste test on eggs has concluded the same thing, which is that they all really just taste like eggs.
Speaking with you is both thrilling and, on the other hand, totally depressing at the same time.
I'm a real hit at parties, Chris.
Okay, so skipping over a few of these, this one really got to me. Organic is not the answer. And you say that yields are lower, it would take more land. But my understanding, let me push back here, isn't the cost of all of the fertilizers and other things you have to use for non-organic, doesn't that more than make up for the issue of land use?
It doesn't. It mitigates it to some extent, but because land use changes are one of the biggest ways agriculture has an impact on climate change, it's really, really difficult to make up for the fact that organic crops yield lower. And I want to state from the get-go, I am a fan of organic. I have met organic farmers doing wonderful work, and I love the fact that they can charge a premium for their product and like-minded consumers can support them. And that makes organic farmers some of the most profitable that we have, which means they have some wiggle room to experiment with these things. And this is all good, but it works when it's a niche, which is, it's going to stay because of the prices. As soon as too many people get into it, then the prices go down and it's not viable anymore. It's a small part of our agriculture. It's a valuable part of our agriculture, but it's not the answer to feeding the world because the crops invariably have about a 20% yield penalty, which means you need 20% more land to grow the same amount of food. But I wish people would just be okay with the fact that organic yields less and embrace it for the things it's good at. And the things that you mentioned, decreasing inputs is one of them. But it's not going to be the way that we feed everybody.
And number 8, tilapia is good, and you write. And if you really can raise fish on poop, it's the most sustainable food ever.
So, of all of the columns I've written, I believe that the one on tilapia has gotten, the most clicks. People love to hate on tilapia because they think it's a trash fish, and there were all kinds of rumors that, it gets fed poop in these farms. And like I said, if we really could raise a food on poop, that is the most sustainable food we can have. And of course, once a tilapia digests poop, it's not poop anymore, it's tilapia.
Let's do
that's a great marketing line. I just want you to know. Poop goes in, tilapia comes out.
It's a white fish. So we took tilapia and we took a bunch of other white fishes and we invited people in. And this was the food people from the Washington Post, including Tom Sietsma, the restaurant critic. And the food was prepared by a chef who specializes in fish. And nobody can pick tilapia out of a lineup. It tastes like all the other fish.
And finally, number 10. This is a good one. Carbs aren't uniquely fattening. I love this one, so explain this.
I really hoped we would run out of time before we got to this one. This idea that carbohydrates are uniquely fattening because they drive insulin spikes, and it is insulin that is instrumental in shuttling blood glucose into fat stores. So if you don't have carbohydrates, then you don't store fat. And just stop for a minute and think about that. So humans evolved in some places where we evolved to eat animals when we were able to kill them. What kind of evolutionary strategy would build a human so that they couldn't put on fat stores when they killed and ate an animal? And then let's look at the evidence on the ground. Go to PubMed and start looking at whether glucose excursions correlate with subsequent intake, and they just don't.
It's okay. We've gone through most of the 10 things.
Hey, wait. When you first read the list, how many of them did you think, she doesn't know what she's talking about?
No, I immediately agreed with all of them.
Really?
Yeah, I'm kind of mad that all the pigs taste the same, even though I knew in my heart you were right. So no, I agree with all of this. It's just the problem is, do people listen to any of this?
Well, it's so funny because I write these things and they go out on the Washington Post site, and the comments, which sometimes my husband scans them and gives me the net.
Go straight on.
There's a lot of, "Tamar, you moron, don't you know?" But I also get a lot of really nice emails from people. And, you know, the idea that somebody reads something that you write and finds it to be interesting or actionable in some way and appreciates it, it makes it all worthwhile. I know lots of people I'm not going to persuade, but I think it's worth having the conversation anyway.
Yeah, I think that's true. Anytime you do anything these days, you get dumped on by large numbers of people. But I do think over a long period of time, if you keep adding, I think it does have an effect. I think you just have to stick to it and not worry about the naysayers. Tamar, love your list. I love your research, and I love your ability to just speak the truth. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
That was Tamar Haspel, food columnist at the Washington Post. Her article is 10 Things I Know Are True About Food That People Don't Want to Believe. Tamar Haspel understands that the world does not run on facts. Napoleon was 5'7", a bit taller than the average Frenchman. Vikings did not wear horned helmets. You don't lose 98% of your body heat through your head, and sugar does not make kids hyperactive. All of which means that when facts bump up against beliefs, the latter almost always wins. And please, don't tell me that candy does not make my kids hyperactive. I just know that I'm right. This is Milk Street Radio. After the break, Adam Gopnik on what your drink of choice says about you. That's coming right up.
This is News 88.7.
You might have noticed, but the places where millions of us get our news and information are giving up on checking the facts. 1A hasn't, and neither has NPR. Our engagement with you helps us tell clear stories, paint a fuller picture, and ask better questions. That's our business model, because facts matter. Join me, Todd Zwillick, along with Jen White, next time on 1A.
Monday mornings at 9 o'clock, or weekday mornings at 11 here on News 88.7.
Houston Public Media brings to you PBS World. Experience the personal connection behind the headlines with programming devoted to telling stories that humanize complex issues. PBS World on TV 8.6 and online at houstonpublicmedia.org.
If you took part in our recent fundraiser, take an extra step to have your donation matched. Current and retired employees may be eligible for an employee matching program. Visit houstonpublicmedia.org/match to search for your company.
You're listening to Milk Street Radio. Right now, Cheryl Day and I will be answering a few more of your banking questions. Cheryl, you ready to take calls?
Let's do it.
Welcome to Milk Street. Who's calling?
Hi, this is Brittany from South Dakota.
Hi, Brittany. How can we help?
Well, okay, so I have a wonderful recipe for brown butter chocolate chip cookies, and they're fantastic cookies. The flavor is outstanding. So they tasted really good, but instead of flat cookies like pictured in the recipe book, they're really puffy, and I prefer more of the like gooey chocolate chip kind of flat cookie.
Just in general, if you have a cakey cookie, that's because there's too much flour. I mean, if you reduce the flour a little bit, how much flour is it? Like 2 cups or something?
Yeah.
I would take at least 2, maybe 3 tablespoons of flour out, like 1 tablespoon per cup.
Are you weighing or?
No, I don't weigh my flour, but I do have a scale, so I can try it.
Well, if she doesn't call for a weight, but sometimes, yeah, it sounds like there's too much flour. What is it about this recipe that you do like? Is it the brown butter?
Yeah, I think the brown butter gives them really nice, the flavor is fantastic.
The 2 things that usually make a puffy, cakey cookie is too much flour, or you cream the butter and sugar instead of melting the sugar. What do you do with it, with the sugar?
You beat the brown butter with the rest of the butter,
cakey texture. So if you browned all of the butter, melted it, browned it, that probably would give you a flatter cookie too, I think.
Okay.
Cheryl?
Great.
Yeah, well, I mean, I probably am not going to give a recipe that many attempts before I maybe move on to another recipe. I mean, there's a lot of recipes that you could do chocolate chip with brown butter if that's the main reason why you like it. Because for me, if I don't like the texture of a chocolate chip cookie, I'm moving on.
Yeah.
You're tough.
Yeah, and I think the brown butter flavor that I was really enjoying as something unique to a chocolate chip cookie.
I agree.
I would take out a couple tablespoons of flour and brown all the butter. That's what I would.
Okay, I will try that. That sounds great. Thank you
And
so
if that
much.
doesn't work, I'm with Cheryl and go get another recipe.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of recipes that you could use. There's different ways you can use brown butter too. Some recipes are melted, and then other recipes will have you chill it, so it's just like using regular butter. If you have another favorite chocolate chip recipe, you could just like weigh out the amount of brown butter, same as what you would use butter, and then make it in the same way. That's another way to try.
Thank you so much.
All right, well, let us know.
Thanks, Brittany.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
This is Milk Street Radio. Looking for some baking inspiration? Give us a call. 855-426-9843. One more time. 855-426-9843. Or please email us at questions@milkstreetradio.com.
Welcome to Milk Street. Who's calling?
Hi, this is Mark.
Hey, Mark. How can we help?
So my question is about chocolate chip pancakes, more specifically, the best way to incorporate the chocolate chips.
Okay.
So when I make them, I've taken two approaches. One is leave the pancake batter as is, sprinkle the chocolate chips onto the pancakes after they're on the griddle. The problem with this, I find, is that when I flip them, exposed chips often end up a little bit chalky and burnt and just not ideal. I've also tried incorporating the chocolate chips into the batter before ladling them onto the griddle. This avoids the burnt chocolate, but I feel like these pancakes don't rise as much and end up a little gummier. So I'm curious what the best way to incorporate chocolate chips into pancakes are.
Sure. Well, gummy, that is a little secret that you just gave me, because gummier to me means more gluten. There may be some overmixing happening, but we may have Chris as two little ones, so he may be an expert chocolate chip pancake maker. But what I do is, I've done both approaches as well, but what I like best is I'll make the pancake batter, fold in just quickly the chocolate chips, and then I just let it rest while I'm heating up my pan. And that seems to work really great for me. Chris, do you have any solutions?
Well, one other thing you could do to avoid overmixing the batter is to add the chips, let's say, along with liquid ingredients, for example, like with the egg and the milk, etc., and put them in. You just don't want to overdo it. If you completely fold your batter and then add the chips, you might end up overworking it a little bit.
Okay.
But you're right. If you just drop, like sometimes with blueberry pancakes, I'll drop blueberries once the pancakes are on the griddle.
Right, same.
And when you flip them over, if they were chocolate chips, you're right, it would burn the chips. So just add them directly to the liquid ingredients and then add to the flour and then mix it together. And just try not to overmix. That would probably do it. You also might try smaller chips, the smaller versions. They may incorporate more easily than larger chips too.
Okay, so it sounds like the issue is most likely overmixing enough of the chocolate chips themselves will prevent the pancakes from rising as much.
Well, just the fact that you said gummy, that was a clue that there's some overmixing happening there.
Yeah, I don't think there's any chemistry with the chocolate. It's not going to really have time to interact. Yeah, it's just how you mix it, I think. Mark, thank you.
All right, appreciate it.
Take care.
All right, thanks. Bye.
You're listening to Milk Street Radio. Right now, let's head into the kitchen with J.M. Hirsch to talk about this week's recipe, Thai coconut and chicken soup. J.M., how are you?
I'm doing great.
You've been in Thailand, and you and I think, seem to spend half our lives searching for more chicken soup recipes, because almost every culture has them. This one is based on coconut milk. And let's start with that. How do you make coconut milk, starting with the coconut?
here in the U.S., which I used to like, actually, until I went on this trip. I went to Thailand and realized, oh, wow, there's a whole other world of coconut milk, and it makes you want to never open a can ever again. I met some families who actually do this as their business, and they harvest the coconuts and they process them from beginning to end. And the amazing part is they don't waste a single ounce of that coconut, even just the outer husk, which is just a big green shell essentially. They turn that into charcoal, and some of the outer husk is processed for sugar. The coconut water is processed either for drinking or also for sugar. And then there's the meat, the rich coconut meat, which when you chop that up and you process it with water, it creates coconut milk. And you can do that several times with the same coconut. So you can reprocess the same coconut meat a couple of times to get different grades or quality of coconut milk. And of course, the first pressing, much like olive oil, is the best. And when I had it for the first time there, I was like, wow, this is a whole other level of coconut milk. And so, of course, everything they added to is that much better. And so I had this Thai coconut chicken soup, Tom Kha Gai, and it's flavored with lemongrass and galangal, which is a relative of ginger, and chicken and mushrooms and lime, fish sauce and chilies. And it's a lot of flavor, but it's that coconut milk that ties it all together, and it does so perfectly because it's got that richness that balances everything and pulls everything together. It tames the lime juice, it tames the chilies.
Now you're going to tell me, I can hear it coming, you're going to tell me I have to make my own coconut milk to really enjoy.
Yep, I'm going to tell you that. You have to do it because, I'll tell you, we tried. We opened a whole lot of cans in the kitchen at Milk Street to try to make this soup and make it as good as what I had in Thailand, and we just couldn't do it with canned coconut milk. It was either kind of watery or just lacked any flavor or richness. It just wasn't good. The solution turned to be a lesson that we actually had learned in Colombia, another coconut milk loving country, which is that you can take dried, unsweetened coconut, the same stuff you buy in the bags in the baking aisle, and steep that in hot water, throw the whole thing in the blender, pulse it a few times, let it sit a little bit, and then strain it through a mesh strainer, and you get impressively good coconut milk. Now, I'm not going to lie and tell you that it's, if you do a side-by-side with what I had in Thailand, that they're the same thing. They're not. But I will say it is leaps and bounds better than anything you're going to get in a can. And it takes maybe 5 minutes to make. It's not a big deal. So I know, telling people to make coconut milk, that's crazy, right? It's not. It's so quick and easy.
I thought I had you, but you definitely redeemed yourself with a 5-minute recipe in a blender. So, yet again, another chicken soup, one of my favorites, Thai-style coconut and chicken soup. And you make your own coconut milk in a blender in 5 minutes. JM, thank you.
Thank you. You can get the recipe for Thai-style coconut and chicken soup at milkstreetradio.com.
You're listening to Milk Street Radio. Now let's hear what Adam Gopnik is thinking about this week. Adam, what's going on?
Oh, well, the usual run of things. My kids have been home for a while, and we've been going out to dinner now and then. And I wonder how it plays out in your family, but it's very weird in mine. We go out for dinner, and the waiter comes over and says, "Would you like something to drink?" And my wife and I always say, "I'll have a glass of Pinot Noir or a glass of Chardonnay." And the kids, my 20-somethings, always ask to see the cocktail menu. And they'll get an Aperol Spritzer or a Paloma, and I will look on in a state of bemusement because it seems to me such a geriatric thing to do. Because the people I knew who loved mixed drinks were my grandparents. They had Manhattans and they had Bronxes, gin and tonics coming out of their ears, and they were never as content as when they were having a martini.
My parents were cocktail parents to the very bitter end. And it was two kinds of drinks. It was the old-fashioned from September through April, and then it was gin and tonics for the summer with cheddar cheese and crackers. And they never, as far as I know, ever had a martini. martini or any other mixed drink. It was 2 drinks, winter drink, summer drink.
But always a cocktail.
Always a cocktail.
And we are wine people. You know, we distinguish New World from Old World Pinot Noir. We want to know if you'd like to have an Argentine Malbec. And we are very acute about the difference between a California Chardonnay and a white Burgundy.
The problem with wine is you can never become an expert, right? As you said, there are vintages, there are varietals, there's terroir. Malbecs from Argentina is great, but what part of Argentina? Infinite curiosity with a very small number of variables. And I find that so refreshing. There's never great disappointment. Maybe there are never great highs, but at least it's dependable. It's something that works day to day. Wine, on the other hand, can teach you how insignificant you are in the world of alcohol. You know what I mean?
Yes, that's well said. Yes, wine is infinitely divisible, right? And the more you think you know about it, the less you actually know. And you live as a wine discriminator in that way, a life of perpetual embarrassment and humiliation as you realize how far down the ladder you actually are. And yes, I think you're right. That's part of the appeal, exactly what I was getting at, of mixed drinks and cocktails to our kids, right? Because that next generation has embraced all of the drinks that our grandparents once loved. And they don't see them as dated or geriatric. They see them, exactly as you say, as sort of democratic in an ironic mode. And they look at us clutching our little glasses of Italian Pinot Nero or California Chardonnay with embarrassment. It's part of the eternal cycle of generations.
Well, and their kids will grow up to drink mocktails, and then we'll have to start the cycle all over.
Yes, either absolutely pure spirits or nothing at all except distilled water.
That's the cowboy cocktail.
Yes.
Shots on the bar and you're done. Talk about simplicity. That's reducing things to the absolute simplest. One thing, one glass, one shot. Adam, thank you. And I think it's time for my old-fashioned.
It's always good spirits to talk to you guys.
That was Adam Gopnik, staff writer at The New Yorker. His latest book is The Real Work on the Mystery of Mastery. That's it for today. You can find all of our episodes at milkstreetradio.com or wherever you get your podcasts. You can learn more about Milk Street at 177milkstreet.com. There you can become a member and get all of our recipes, access to all live stream cooking classes, free standard shipping for the Milk Street store, and more. You can also find us on Facebook at Christopher Kimball's Milk Street, on Instagram at 177 Milk Street. We'll be back next week with more food stories and kitchen questions. And thanks, as always, for listening.
Christopher Kimball's Milk Street Radio is produced by Milk Street in association with GBH. Co-founder Melissa Baldino. Executive producer Annie Sinspa. Senior editor Melissa Allison. Senior producer Sarah Clapp. Associate producer Caroline Davis with production help from Debbie Paddock. Additional editing by Sydney Lewis. Audio mixing by Jay Allison at Atlantic Public Media in Woods Hole, Massachusetts. Theme music by Chubop Crew. Additional music by George Brindle Egloff. Christopher Kimball's Milk Street Radio is distributed by PRX.